Yeah, I feel that
And
a lot.
it isn't, yes, I think it's more common than the reverse, actually. Although people can act selfishly from time to time, I do think that most people punish themselves more than they punish other people. And that's also something to be aware of and to see if you can regulate that, because it's not necessarily for the best, even if it might be associated with the willingness to take responsibility.
Yeah, I think it just comes from having to take a lot of responsibility growing up, and so you would be hyper, you would have to be very stern on yourself. But I don't want to get away from shame because it's really important.
Well, shame is a good pointer to the good too, hypothetically, because you could ask yourself, well, what am I ashamed about? What is shame? What should I do about it? Those are all good questions. Maybe you can dispense with the shame that's excessive. But if you're ashamed, well, does that mean that you did something wrong? Well, if it does, that means that there's such a thing as doing something wrong. That seems to imply that there's such a thing as wrong. That seems to imply that there's such a thing as right. And so shame, in principle, can also be a pathway to what is good. Say, well, if I'm engaged in something that's good, at least I won't be ashamed. And that, I mean, everybody has to answer these questions for themselves, but I think that's something that's very much worth considering. What would be the case if you decided to stop engaging in all those actions that made you ashamed?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. No, it's good. And it's nice to think that shame can be a direction, and anything can be a direction that could lead us then to the reverse, which is like, yeah, if something is wrong, then there must be something that's right. And so,
well, it's the best evidence for it's the best evidence that I know of for something that's right.
Right.
Like you can find people who will debate the existence of the true or the good. They're cynical and they're nihilistic, let's say. They're not naive, maybe that's their advantage. But it's very rare to find someone who doesn't believe that there's such a thing as what's wrong. And so, and untrue. And so that's a good starting point. It's like, if you want to discover what's right, you can first more easily discover what's wrong. Look, I think that's partly why we like anti-heroes in movies and in fiction. What's the purpose of a dark character? Well, he shines a light on what the reverse is. And sometimes that's very powerful. In the Batman series, for example, the Joker generally was a better bad character than Batman was a good character. He was more realistic and more thought-provoking.
Yeah. Yeah, there was more... I don't want to say more depth there, but there was more depth there. There was more to examine. Depth. Yeah.
Well, I think it's partly because the Joker, especially Heath Ledger's version, was pretty realistically evil in a psychological sense. Whereas Batman, well, he's a vigilante, and whereas being a vigilante might be, one pale reflection of what the good is, because it requires courage and is involved with justice, it's still a pretty pale reflection of what the good is. So I do think
sometimes... Go ahead. Sorry, Doctor.
No, you had a thought. I'd like to hear it.
I sometimes think maybe that's why it's almost interesting to be the Joker in the world sometimes, to delve in that turmoil of the darkness and stuff, because it's a more complex character in some ways. There's almost some appeal to it.
Well, there's a notion derived from the psychological theories put forth by Carl Jung, and he derived some of this from Nietzsche, a philosopher. And Nietzsche famously claimed that most morality was not morality, but cowardice. It was merely the fear of getting caught.
Wow.
Or the fear of public humiliation, something like that. That's what keeps you in line. So then if there's a riot and there's no police around, you're perfectly happy to throw a rock through the window because the probability of getting caught declines precipitously. So, and then if your morality is all persona, so for Jung, a morality that was nothing but conformity and adherence to social norms and fear, sort of a narrow, constrained, I'll never dare to do anything wrong and therefore I'm good.
Yeah.
That wasn't good at all. And
we have a lot of that these days.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And so under those conditions, if you're nothing but a persona, and so you're an obedient coward, let's say, then your dark side is actually the pathway to salvation. Because it's what breaks out. Yes, precisely. It's what breaks that tawdry, banal morality into pieces and leads you forward.
That's crazy. So sometimes you need the dark side to even see what's going on the. It's tricky.
Well, it's very, very frequently the case, and I mean it's an axiom of Jungian psychotherapy that the pathway to development is through the shadow. So, for example, you might have somebody in your clinical practice who's been raised by extremely conservative and religious parents, which I'm not criticizing, by the way, but they're 27 years old and still a virgin. Now, look, there's utility in fidelity, and promiscuity isn't a plus, but it might be that if you're still a virgin at the age of 27, that it's necessary for you to investigate your lust in order to progress past your mere childlike obedience.